What if Prince Harry's American dream is quietly collapsing, and he doesn't even realize it yet? Sounds dramatic? Maybe, but not as dramatic as the reality unfolding behind closed doors in Washington, D.C., where high-powered lawyers, conservative think tanks, and political titans may be circling around one of the most controversial royals in modern history. This isn't just about a prince. This is about privilege, power, and what happens when you admit to breaking U.S. immigration law. In a best-selling book read by millions. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind. Remember when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back from royal duties in 2020? They called it a step back, a chance to seek privacy, peace, and a fresh start. But let's be honest, that's not what happened. They didn't disappear into a quiet life. They went Hollywood. Deals with Netflix, Spotify, interviews with Oprah, tell-alls, documentaries, staged paparazzi moments, and finally, the bombshell memoir Spare, a book so revealing, it may have just triggered the one thing they didn't see coming. A possible U.S. government investigation. Because inside that memoir, tucked between royal gossip and trauma talk, Prince Harry made one of the most reckless admissions any immigrant could make, especially an immigrant holding a visa. He admitted to drug use. Repeated. Recreational. Cocaine. Weed. Psychedelics. Let me ask you something. If you were applying for a U.S. visa and admitted to using cocaine and mushrooms, would you get approved? Didn't think so. So how did Harry get in? That's the question the Heritage Foundation wants answered. It's the reason they've launched a legal battle against the Biden administration, demanding that Harry's immigration records be unsealed. And now, according to explosive new leaks, former President Donald Trump has taken an interest, a very public, very personal interest. Because this story isn't just heating up, it's catching fire, and it's threatening to burn down everything the Sussexes have built on American soil. But why now? Why is this story exploding again? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. Not just to the moment Harry landed in Los Angeles with Meghan and Archie. Not just to spare. But to the hidden war quietly brewing between Trump-aligned conservatives and the former royal couple, who, whether they realize it or not, have become symbols in a much larger cultural fight. This isn't just politics. It's optics, identity, class, hypocrisy, the rules of immigration, and who gets to break them. And let me tell you, when Donald Trump sees an opportunity to go after hypocrisy and elitism, especially when it comes with a royal crown and a Hollywood zip code, he takes it. But it didn't start with Trump. It started with a question. Did Prince Harry lie on his visa application? Let that sink in. Because when Harry filled out that DS-160 form, the one every non-citizen must complete to enter the U.S., he would have seen a question right there in black and white. Have you ever used drugs? Yes or no? No room for nuance. No room for it was in my youth. No room for I'm a royal. Just a checkbox. Yes or no. And if he said yes? Legally, the State Department could have denied him entry. So again, how did he get in? According to former immigration officers, the only ways are: he lied, he got a waiver, he received special treatment. Now ask yourself, if the average applicant said they used cocaine and mushrooms in the past, would they be waved through? Didn't think so. That's why this story matters. Because if Harry lied, he committed visa fraud. If he got special treatment, that's political corruption. And if the Biden administration covered it up, that's a scandal waiting to erupt in an election year. No wonder Trump is circling back. But there's something deeper here. Something the media won't say out loud. This isn't just about legal loopholes or presidential grudges. This is about fairness, accountability, and a growing sense, among millions of Americans, that some people live by different rules. Harry and Meghan walked into America promising honesty, transparency. They sold themselves as victims of an outdated monarchy, refugees seeking freedom and truth. But how free can you be when your entire residency might be based on a lie? This story is erupting now because people are asking, why should we be held to one standard and they to another? It's also about timing. Because as 2026 approaches, with Trump building momentum for a political comeback, his allies are scouring for symbolic victories, cases that hit home with his base. And what hits harder than a prince, married to a Hollywood actress who admitted to drug use, trashed American institutions, and allegedly got a free pass. Let me paint a picture. While veterans are denied visas for minor infractions, while immigrants are deported for minor drug charges, Prince Harry lives in a Montecito mansion, filming Netflix specials, lecturing Americans about climate change, family values, and trauma. How does that look? Not good. Not now. Not in the current climate. And if you think Trump and his team don't see the potential, think again. They've already started laying the groundwork. Conservative media outlets are running the stories. The Heritage Foundation has filed Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, lawsuits. Legal briefs are flying. And the Biden administration? So far, radio silence, which only adds fuel to the fire. Because the more they stay quiet, the louder the questions become. Why won't they release Harry's visa application? Why are they fighting this in court? What are they trying to hide? And most chillingly, what if the answer is that Prince Harry got a visa he never should have received? What if this entire American chapter, from Netflix deals to political lectures, was built on a single false checkbox? What happens then? Deportation? Scandal? A political earthquake? No one knows. Yet. But here's what we do know. This story is growing. Fast. And it has all the ingredients of a full-blown media firestorm. Royalty, drugs, immigration, politics, betrayal, and a possible showdown between the most divisive U.S. president in modern history and the world's most controversial prince. And at the heart of it all, a simple, terrifying possibility. That Prince Harry's American dream was never real to begin with. Just a performance. A paperwork illusion. One mistake away from collapse. And the most ironic twist? The very memoir that was supposed to tell his truth might be the thing that finally exposes it. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the most dangerous thing Prince Harry ever did in America wasn't an interview, wasn't a speech, wasn't even walking away from the royal family? What if it was writing a book? Because when Spare hit shelves in January 2023, the world treated it like gossip. Trauma, royal drama, family secrets, late-night jokes, bestseller lists, millions of copies sold. But buried beneath the headlines and punchlines was something far more serious. Something most readers missed. Something lawyers didn't. Something immigration officials absolutely would. And that something may now be the single thread unraveling Harry's entire life in the United States. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to say out loud. Spare wasn't just a memoir. It may have been a confession. A confession that never should have been published by a non-citizen living in America. Think about that. Because when Harry sat down to write Spare, he wasn't just telling stories. He was creating a permanent, public, legally admissible record of his past behavior. Not whispered to a therapist. Not joked about in private. Not buried in anonymous sources. Published. Printed. Promoted. Global. And in that record, Harry admitted, without hesitation, to using illegal drugs. Cocaine. Marijuana. Psychedelics. He described them casually, almost nostalgically, as moments of self-discovery. Healing. Escape. But here's the problem. In the eyes of U.S. immigration law, there is no poetic license. There is no "it was a long time ago." There is no "I was young." There is no "I'm royalty." There is only one question that matters. Did you ever use drugs? And if the answer is yes, your visa eligibility changes instantly. So let's slow this down. Because this is where everything begins. When Prince Harry entered the United States, he would have done so on a visa. Possibly an O-1, reserved for individuals of extraordinary ability, or another temporary status. Regardless of the category, every visa application requires honesty. Absolute honesty. On the forms. In interviews. In background checks. Drug use isn't a side note. It's a red flag. And immigration lawyers will tell you this. Admissions of past drug use can trigger denial, revocation, or removal, depending on circumstances. So when Harry publicly admitted to using cocaine and psychedelics, something snapped into focus for people who understand the law. Because suddenly, the question wasn't moral. It was legal. Let me ask you something. If an average immigrant admitted in a published book that they used cocaine, would immigration officials ignore it? Would they shrug and say, "It was years ago"? Or would they reopen the file? You already know the answer. Which is exactly why the Heritage Foundation saw an opening. They weren't offended by the book. They weren't shocked by the drug use. They saw leverage. Because in American law, public admissions matter. especially written ones, especially when they contradict sworn statements. And here's where things get uncomfortable. If Harry answered no on his visa application and later admitted yes in spare, that's a problem. A serious one. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not semantics. That's potentially visa fraud. Now, before anyone panics, let's be clear. No one has seen Harry's visa application. That's the point. It's sealed, protected, hidden behind privacy laws. And that secrecy is exactly what makes this story explode. Because the moment Spare came out, lawyers began asking questions. Quietly at first. Did he disclose this? Was a waiver granted? Was discretion used? Or was the system bent? And when those questions weren't answered, they escalated. Enter the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank with deep legal resources, political influence, and one very specific interest: exposing what they see as elite privilege. They weren't interested in Harry's feelings. They weren't interested in Meghan's narrative. They were interested in the paperwork. Because if Harry got special treatment, they could prove a point far bigger than one prince. They could argue that the system is rigged. And that argument plays extremely well in modern American politics. So they filed a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA, not asking for gossip, not asking for opinions. They asked for records, specifically Prince Harry's immigration documents. And the government said no. Not just no. They fought it. They refused to release even basic information about whether Harry received a waiver or how his admissions were evaluated. And that refusal set off alarms. Because when the government digs in like that, it usually means one of two things. Either there's nothing there, and they want to protect privacy, or there's something very there, and they want to avoid embarrassment. Which do you think critics believe? Exactly. Now, let's talk about Spare itself. Because the tone matters. Harry didn't write like someone afraid of consequences. He wrote like someone who believed he was untouchable, casual, confident, unbothered. He described cocaine use at a friend's house. He talked about marijuana and psychedelics as tools for growth. He framed them as part of his healing journey. No disclaimers, no legal caveats, no concern for optics. Almost as if it never occurred to him that immigration law applies to him too. That's the contradiction at the heart of this story. Harry claims to be deeply traumatized by privilege and institutional power. Yet he wrote a book assuming immunity from consequences. And that contradiction didn't go unnoticed. Immigration experts went on record saying the admissions were highly unusual for someone on a visa. Former DHS officials raised eyebrows. Conservative media smelled blood. Because suddenly, Harry wasn't just a prince with opinions. He was a test case, a symbol. And symbols are powerful, especially when politics enters the room. But here's the twist most people missed. Spare wasn't just about drugs. It was about authority. Throughout the book, Harry attacked institutions. The monarchy, the press, the military structure he once served, even the idea of national loyalty. And to many Americans, especially conservatives, that mattered. Because visas aren't just about paperwork. They're about trust, about whether a foreign national respects the country they're living in. And when Harry used American platforms to criticize American values, military culture, free speech, and constitutional norms, critics began asking a new question. Not just, did he use drugs? But, does he meet the good moral character standard? That clause exists. Quietly, powerfully. It gives immigration authorities broad discretion. And suddenly, Harry's book wasn't just reckless. It was dangerous. Because every word added to a narrative that he didn't respect the system that allowed him to live in the U.S. in the first place. Now, was this intentional? Probably not. But intention doesn't matter when consequences arrive. And consequences were quietly gathering. Behind the scenes. In legal offices. In political strategy rooms. In conservative circles waiting for the right moment. Because Spare did something else too. It created a paper trail. Every quote. Every page. Every interview reinforcing the admissions. Harry doubled down. He joked about it. He defended it. And with every defense, the case grew stronger. You might be wondering, why didn't the media jump on this immediately? Simple. Most journalists don't understand immigration law. And those who do didn't want to touch a story that complicated the victim narrative. Because asking whether Harry lied on a visa application doesn't make him look brave. It makes him look careless. Or worse, entitled. And entitlement is a dangerous look in America right now. especially when millions of immigrants play by the rules. So the story simmered, quietly, until politics entered the frame. Because once the Heritage Foundation escalated the lawsuit, it stopped being about Harry. It became about the Biden administration, about transparency, about favoritism, about whether the government protects elites. And that's when a familiar name reappeared: Donald Trump. He didn't jump in immediately. He waited, watched the reaction, measured the outrage, let the narrative form. Because Trump understands something very well: timing. And when the timing was right, he made it personal. But before Trump ever opened his mouth, the damage was already done. Because Spare had planted a seed that asked a simple, brutal question. If Prince Harry were not a prince, would he still be here? And once that question was out in the open, there was no going back. Because now, the story wasn't about sympathy. It was about fairness. And fairness is a battlefield. But what came next, what happened after Trump's allies began digging, would turn a legal curiosity into a political weapon. And it would place Prince Harry directly in the crosshairs of a man who never forgets a slight. What kind of organization takes on a British royal, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the White House, all at once? Who has the audacity, not just to question Prince Harry's right to live in America, but to demand his visa records be unsealed, knowing it could trigger a diplomatic, legal, and media firestorm? The answer: the Heritage Foundation. But this isn't just some conservative think tank lobbying for tax cuts or writing white papers on fiscal reform. No. This is a political war machine, quietly powerful, deeply connected, and now, locked in a behind-the-scenes legal brawl that could end with Prince Harry on the next plane out of LAX. And here's the twist: they planned it. From the moment Spare dropped and Harry's drug confessions exploded across headlines, the Heritage Foundation wasn't just watching. They were strategizing. And they saw something most of us missed. They didn't see a scandal. They saw a case. One that could expose elite favoritism in real time, while making headlines, shaking up a 2026 political campaign, and dragging the Biden administration into a constitutional corner. Let's step into their war room, because this is where the game really begins. First, you need to understand who they are. Founded in 1973, the Heritage Foundation is one of the most influential conservative organizations in the United States. Based in Washington, D.C., they've advised Republican presidents, written draft legislation, and shaped policy on everything from education to border control. They're not loud, they're not flashy, but they're everywhere. They don't just comment on politics, they engineer it. And when they launch a lawsuit, it's never random. It's deliberate, surgical, strategic. So when they announced they were suing the Department of Homeland Security to force the release of Harry's immigration records, it wasn't a publicity stunt. It was an opening move. The legal spearhead? Niall Gardiner, a British-born foreign policy expert, former aide to Margaret Thatcher, and now a director at Heritage. He knows the royal family. He knows the U.S. legal system. And he knows how to play media optics like a violin. In interviews, Gardiner has been calm, precise, and devastatingly blunt. There is a serious question here. Did Prince Harry receive preferential treatment? Did he tell the truth on his visa forms? If not, that would be a violation of U.S. immigration law. No bombast. Just legal questions, deadly ones. But let's go deeper. Because inside Heritage's legal division sits a small but lethal team of attorneys who specialize in administrative law and federal records. These aren't political pundits. They're document assassins. Their strategy? Use the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, like a scalpel. Carve into the opaque bureaucracies of DHS, Customs and Border Protection, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Demand transparency. Use the courts if necessary. And that's exactly what they did. Step 1. Submit FOIA requests for Prince Harry's immigration records. Step 2. When DHS stonewalled, sue them in federal court. Step 3. Escalate. Now here's where things get sharp. The Heritage legal team argued that there is overwhelming public interest in knowing how Harry received a visa, given his own public admission of drug use. They didn't claim to know that Harry lied. They didn't accuse the government directly. They simply pointed to Harry's own words, his book, his interviews, and then asked, why won't the government release the form? If it's clean, no issue. If he was granted a waiver, fine, just show the documentation. But if he wasn't, If he said no to drug use and now says yes to it in his book, we have a problem. Here's the kicker. Harry's team stayed silent. No comment. No public legal rebuttal. No proof offered of how the visa was obtained. And the Biden administration? They fought back. DHS responded to the Heritage suit by claiming Harry's visa file is personal, private, and not of public concern. But that just made it worse. Because to Heritage and millions of Americans, that response reeked of a cover-up. After all, how can it not be of public interest when the man in question lives in California on a high-profile visa, has multi-million-dollar contracts with U.S. corporations, gave TV interviews seen by tens of millions, admitted to using illegal drugs in a global bestseller, and is married to a woman reportedly interested in political office? We're not talking about a random tourist here. We're talking about someone using America as a platform, a business hub, and a political launchpad. And that, Heritage argued, changes everything. Behind the scenes, sources say the lawsuit galvanized conservative donors. Why? Because the optics were gold. To Trump's base, this wasn't about Harry. It was about hypocrisy. They see everyday immigrants deported for minor infractions, veterans denied green cards, families torn apart over marijuana convictions from 20 years ago. And yet here's a prince, a literal prince, writing in a book that he snorted coke behind a country house, smoked joints at Eton, and did magic mushrooms in someone else's bathroom. And he's sipping lattes in Montecito? It was almost too perfect. Heritage wasn't just suing for legal clarity. They were building a symbol of the elite breaking rules with impunity. They timed press releases around major political moments. They booked analysts on Fox News. They whispered to allies in Congress. And slowly, the pressure built. Conservative lawmakers began tweeting about the case. Podcasts picked it up. Hashtags like hashtag #DeportHarry and hashtag Visagate started trending. This wasn't just legal anymore. It was becoming cultural. And that's when Trump's orbit took real notice. Now imagine the scene inside the Heritage Foundation HQ as this momentum snowballs. Stacks of documents, printouts of spare, highlighted passages, legal memos, FOIA statutes, whiteboards mapping DHS's chain of command. And then someone says it. What if we win this? Because if the court rules in Heritage's favor and forces DHS to release the visa file, and if that file contains discrepancies, the fallout could be nuclear. Headlines in every paper. Congressional hearings. Calls for Harry's visa to be revoked. Political fire from the right. And the ultimate prize, a direct blow to the Biden administration for allowing it to happen. That's the real war game here. If Harry's visa was approved without disclosure, or if political pressure helped him skate by, it's a scandal. One that taints the image of fairness in U.S. immigration policy. And in an election season, that's gold. Now let's not pretend Heritage doesn't understand the stakes. They do. This isn't about winning a court case. It's about shaping a narrative. One law for you, a different one for them. And if that narrative sticks, if average Americans start to believe it's true, it could ripple across every debate about immigration, celebrity privilege, border control, and elitism in America. But the war room has one more strategy. They're playing a waiting game. Because they know spare isn't going away. Harry keeps doing interviews, keeps making statements, keeps leaving a trail. Every time he opens his mouth, it's evidence. And every time DHS refuses to comply, it looks worse. It's a pressure cooker. And the Heritage Foundation? They're just slowly turning up the heat. Because at the center of it all, there's one document, one form, one visa application. And the minute it's unsealed, everything changes. It either clears Harry completely, or confirms that someone, somewhere, gave him a pass no regular person would ever receive. And if that happens, the consequences won't just be legal. They'll be political. And once that storm starts, even the royal title won't protect him. But what the Heritage Foundation didn't count on, what changed everything, was the sudden appearance of a new player. Not a lawyer, not a politician, but a man with a vendetta. Because as the lawsuit gathered steam, another voice stepped forward. One that could weaponize the issue like no one else. One that didn't need a court to turn public opinion. One who had already clashed with the Sussexes and never forgot it. Donald J. Trump. And his next move would turn a conservative lawsuit into a global crisis. What happens when the man with the biggest mouth in American politics sets his sights on a British prince? What happens when Donald J. Trump, the master of spectacle, controversy, and media manipulation, decides that Prince Harry is not just a nuisance, but a perfect political punching bag? Well, then you don't have a visa dispute anymore. You have a spectacle. And when Trump gets involved, the spotlight intensifies, the stakes skyrocket, and the fallout becomes unpredictable, explosive even. Because Harry wasn't just caught in a legal fight. He was now in Trump's crosshairs. And in the world of American politics, that is a nightmare. It started subtly. A comment here, a jab there, a thinly veiled insult at a rally, thrown in between chants about the border and the deep state. But behind those lines, strategy. Let's rewind. Trump had long harbored an icy disdain for Meghan Markle. He didn't hide it. He called her nasty back in 2019 when she criticized him during his UK state visit. She said she'd move to Canada if he were elected. He remembered. Oh, he always remembers. So when Meghan and Harry moved to the United States instead and began using American platforms to blast their family, stir up political conversations, and rake in millions through Hollywood deals, Trump saw opportunity. To him, they weren't just annoying royals. They were elitists, foreigners, hypocrites, and worse, they were useful. Because Trump understood something fundamental. His base didn't just tolerate his crusade against the elite, they craved it. What better target than a prince who admitted to illegal drug use, married a controversial actress, and now lives in a mansion while preaching to working-class Americans about their behavior? It was too good. The Heritage Foundation's lawsuit gave it structure. Spare gave it ammo. And the silence from the Biden administration? That gave it fire. Trump knew what he was doing. He didn't storm onto the scene. He let the controversy build. Let the media start whispering about Harry's visa. Let conservatives speculate. Let the memes flood in. Deport the Duke, royal flush, Harry's green card scandal. And when the story reached just the right boil, he dropped the bomb. At a campaign stop in Des Moines, standing before thousands of roaring supporters, Trump pivoted from inflation to immigration. And then, like a sniper, he brought up Harry. "Can you believe this guy?" he said, shaking his head. "He writes a whole book, admits to drugs, talks about cocaine, mushrooms, the works, and Biden lets him stay. Anyone else? Gone." The crowd erupted. He leaned in. "You lie on a visa form. Should be automatic deportation. That's how it works, folks. Unless you're a prince, I guess. Then you get the Hollywood treatment." Pause. "Not under my watch." And there it was. A line not just aimed at Harry, but at every voter who ever felt the system was rigged. Trump didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need documents or legal arguments. He just had to say it. And the damage was done. Backstage, his team saw the reaction. Clips of the moment went viral. Twitter trended with hashtag #TrumpOnHarry. Fox News ran segments titled "Harry's Visa Scandal." Should he be deported? Tucker Carlson, no longer at Fox but still a massive force online, did a full 20-minute takedown, calling Harry a walking example of elite impunity. Even moderate voices began asking questions. Why won't DHS release the records? Why did Harry feel so confident admitting to crimes in a best-selling book? Was he ever truly vetted? And that's when the whispers turned into shouts. Congressional Republicans started drafting letters. Multiple lawmakers, some seeking re-election, others eyeing Senate bids, signed a joint request to DHS demanding transparency. Trump's campaign team leaked that they were exploring legislative accountability mechanisms if Trump returned to office. And conservative donors began pouring in money, excited not just by policy promises, but by the cultural war playing out. This wasn't about immigration anymore. This was a symbol. Harry had become a lightning rod. Meanwhile, inside Montecito, panic. Harry's team was blindsided. They had expected Spare to spark backlash, but not this. Not lawsuits. Not presidential candidates calling for deportation. Not social media users digging through old interviews for inconsistencies. And certainly not the looming specter of a new administration, one with a personal grudge and a legal case brewing. Sources close to Archwell claimed staffers were instructed to go quiet. No comments. No reactions. Meghan reportedly urged Harry to stay off interviews, to avoid pouring fuel on the fire. But it was too late. Trump had latched on. And once he smells weakness, he doesn't let go. Now here's where things got really dangerous for Harry. Trump's campaign began coordinating with outside legal groups. Whispers of expedited FOIA orders, congressional hearings, and selective visa reviews began circulating. No laws needed to be passed. Just pressure. Just visibility. And the media played along. Conservative outlets dug through spare, quoting Harry line by line. I had a few drinks. Then I ingested a few mushrooms. Was it hallucinogenic? Yup. Lines of cocaine. I was willing to try anything that would take the edge off. We smoked a joint on the balcony. Every quote. A weapon. Each segment ended the same way. If you or I said that, we'd be banned. So why is Harry still here? Trump didn't need to lead the story anymore. He had turned it into a movement. But here's the irony. Harry likely thought Spare would humanize him, show his growth, his pain, his journey. Instead, in Trump's America, it turned him into the villain. Not because he was honest, but because he was privileged. Because he got to be honest, without paying the price. And that contradiction? That was political gold. Trump painted it perfectly. Prince Harry admits to crimes. Writes a book about it. Sells millions. You admit to crimes, you get deported. It was brutal. It was effective. And it was only the beginning. At a private fundraiser in Florida, Trump reportedly joked, "When I'm back, we'll have to take a closer look at Prince Cocaine. You know, make sure his visa's in order." The room laughed. Donors clapped. But behind the humor? A promise. Trump wasn't just trolling. He was telegraphing. A second term would bring investigations, reviews, restructuring. And Harry, public, exposed, and vulnerable, was now on that list. Even DHS officials began to sweat. Because suddenly, their quiet refusal to release Harry's visa file was turning into a political liability. Senators wanted answers. Staffers feared subpoenas. And conservative legal groups hinted at further lawsuits. Trump had turned Harry's presence in America into a litmus test. A question of fairness. A symbol of what's broken. But here's the most chilling part. Trump didn't need to win the election to do damage. Just raising the issue put Harry under the microscope. Every time the story aired, it forced DHS to justify its secrecy. Every time Trump tweeted, "Where's the visa?" it reignited the fire. And for Harry, there was no escape. Because even if the courts ruled in his favor, even if the visa application was technically compliant, the public perception was sealed. He was no longer the brave prince exposing trauma. He was the outsider who got a free pass. And in Trump's America, that's not survivable. But just when the heat reached boiling point, just when Harry's team prepared a quiet legal defense, something else happened. Something far more dangerous. Because Harry wasn't the only one Trump wanted to humiliate. Meghan Markle had a history with him, too. And what she did next, under pressure, under fire, would only make things worse. Why is it that when Prince Harry finds himself in hot water, Meghan Markle always seems to make the headlines? Next? Coincidence? Or calculation? Because just when the visa scandal was beginning to spiral, when Trump had officially turned Harry into a political lightning rod, Meghan Markle stepped into the frame once again, arms folded, jaw clenched, and eyes set on reclaiming the narrative. But this wasn't a rescue. It was gasoline. Because the truth is, Trump's grudge against Prince Harry pales in comparison to his disdain for Meghan Markle. And what she did next? It wasn't damage control. It was escalation. Let's get something straight. Donald Trump has always had a Meghan problem. She called him misogynistic and divisive back in 2016. She publicly supported Hillary Clinton. She mocked his rhetoric. And when he visited the UK as president, she refused to attend the state banquet in protest. Trump's response? He branded her nasty. And that wasn't a passing jab. That was a scar. Because to Trump, everything is personal. Every criticism is a betrayal. Every slight, a score to be settled. So when Meghan and Harry left the royal family and set up shop in California, crafting a new empire of podcasts, documentaries, and public speeches, Trump wasn't amused. He was watching. He was waiting. And when the Heritage Foundation filed their lawsuit, when Harry's visa scandal began snowballing into national headlines, Trump saw something else. A perfect opportunity to attack Meghan, without even mentioning her name. But here's the thing. Meghan didn't stay quiet. She never does. In fact, just weeks after Trump began making public comments about Harry's drug confessions and the visa investigation, Meghan resurfaced. Not in a defensive posture, not in a tearful interview, but on stage. at a glitzy, high-profile, female empowerment summit in Los Angeles, flashing confidence, poise, and that unmistakable Markle charisma. The topic? Justice, visibility, leadership, power. But her message? Painfully clear. I've seen what happens when people try to silence others, she told the cheering crowd, without naming names. But truth always rises. The crowd roared. Social media exploded. But behind the applause, one person was clenching his fists. Donald Trump. Because that statement, vague as it was, read like a declaration of war. Meghan was back, speaking out, radiating defiance. And suddenly, the visa scandal wasn't just about Harry. It was about both of them. The Sussexes. United. Unapologetic. Confrontational. And to Trump? That meant open season. Behind closed doors, Trump's allies warned him, don't let this become personal. Stay focused. Don't go after Meghan, it'll backfire. But Trump? He doesn't do subtlety. So in a radio interview days later, Trump dropped another bombshell. When asked about Harry's visa situation, Trump smirked and said, he's got bigger problems than paperwork, believe me. And you know, his wife, she's not exactly America's sweetheart. The implication hung in the air like smoke. And suddenly, Meghan was front and center. Again, let's talk about Meghan's role in all this. Because while Harry may have written spare, Meghan shaped the brand. She crafted the image, the rebrand, the message, and whether she meant to or not, she inserted herself into America's most volatile political environment. She took meetings with Democratic power players. She gave speeches about equality and reform. She even cold-called voters during the 2020 election cycle, a move that stunned royal traditionalists and outraged conservatives. To Trump and his supporters, she wasn't just an actress or a duchess. She was a political operator. And in their eyes, she used her royal title as a platform to push a progressive, anti-Trump agenda. So when Harry's visa status became national news, it wasn't just about immigration. It was about influence, power, and double standards. Conservatives asked, would any foreign spouse of a politically outspoken American be allowed to stay if their visa was questionable? Would anyone else be given this much leniency? Is Meghan using her fame to shield Harry from consequences? Suddenly, the question shifted. Not just did Harry lie, but is Meghan helping him get away with it? And then, just when the fire seemed contained, Meghan made another move. A high-profile lunch with California Governor Gavin Newsom. Photographed, publicized, carefully framed as a discussion about women's leadership initiatives. But the timing? Suspiciously perfect. Critics pounced. Why was Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, meeting with the governor during a political crisis surrounding her husband's immigration status? Was she seeking political cover? Was she signaling ambitions of her own? Or was she quietly lobbying for the problem to go away? The tabloids spun theories. Conservative Twitter erupted. Pundits speculated. And Trump? He saw red. Because now, the woman he once dismissed as nasty was sitting with governors, rubbing elbows with California's political elite, while his supporters chanted "Deport Harry" at rallies across the country. And the worst part? She was doing it all in his own backyard. California. Hollywood. The media circus he once dominated. Now it was hers. Let's not forget, Trump and Meghan represent opposite universes. Trump, populist, bombastic, ruthless, America first. Meghan, progressive, polished, international, image-driven. And now, their worlds had collided. Not by choice, but by conflict. Because Harry's visa case had become a proxy war. Trump's camp versus the Sussex machine. And Meghan's involvement only made it worse. Because while Harry played defense, Meghan moved offensively. Carefully curated appearances, powerful alliances, messages of resilience. But here's the contradiction. The more Meghan leaned into her power, the more political the issue became. And the more political it became, the more dangerous it got. Because immigration law doesn't care about speeches. It doesn't bend for optics. And the deeper Meghan got involved, the more critics said, this isn't just about legality, it's about privilege. And then came the real kicker. A former DHS official leaked to a conservative outlet that internal whispers were raising concerns about perceived pressure from high-profile individuals tied to the Sussexes. No names, no proof. But the headline hit like a thunderclap. DHS source. Meghan's political allies may have intervened in Harry visa case. It was the spark Trump had been waiting for. That night, at a campaign fundraiser, he made it official. These people, they think they can buy influence. Say a few buzzwords, do a few speeches, and boom, visa granted. If I were president, we'd be looking at this very closely. Believe me. The room cheered. The message was clear. Trump was now linking Meghan Markle to the alleged corruption at the heart of Harry's visa scandal. And with a second presidential run already underway, he had every reason to keep that narrative alive. So where did that leave Meghan? Cornered? Hardly. She doubled down. Her team booked more appearances, quietly signaled new projects, emphasized her American identity in speeches. But here's the thing. It didn't slow the storm. It fed it. Because the more visible she became, the more Trump used her as a counterpoint to real Americans. She was branded as elite, entitled, out of touch, and her association with Harry's visa controversy gave critics a target they could not resist. In Trump's words, she talks a big game about justice. But what kind of justice is it when your husband breaks the law and gets a mansion instead of a deportation notice? Brutal. Unfair? Maybe. But effective? Absolutely. And while Meghan may have tried to protect her husband, she may have made him more vulnerable than ever. Because now, the issue wasn't just legal. It was political. And once politics gets involved, everything becomes fair game. But what came next was no longer about speculation. Because a new leak, one that no one expected, was about to blow the whole case wide open. What do you do when you're standing in the middle of a political firestorm, when a former U.S. president is breathing down your neck, lawsuits are piling up, and your own immigration status is under review? If you're Prince Harry, apparently, you throw another punch. Because just when his critics expected him to lie low, just when legal analysts warned him to keep quiet, avoid missteps, and let his lawyers handle the brewing visa crisis, Harry did what no one expected. He launched a fresh attack, not on Trump, not on the Heritage Foundation, not even on the U.S. government, but on something far more sensitive, the very institutions that could decide whether he stays in the country. And with that one ill-timed move, he may have sealed his own fate. It started with a panel discussion in Silicon Valley, a tech summit, exclusive, invite only, a room full of billionaires, AI engineers, and activists, cameras rolling, moderators smiling. The topic? Digital freedom, online trauma, the psychology of information warfare. It was, in theory, right in Harry's wheelhouse. He'd spoken before about mental health, media toxicity, social media regulation. Nothing too controversial. But this time, he went further. Too far. Midway through the conversation, Harry pivoted sharply. He began criticizing U.S. media outlets, naming specific networks. He claimed they weaponized misinformation, that they radicalized millions, and were complicit in spreading dangerous narratives. And then came the line that sent a chill through Washington. The institutions meant to hold people accountable in this country are broken. They protect the powerful. They fail the public. Gasps. Stunned silence. And then applause. Tentative. Uncomfortable. It was vague, but not vague enough. Because those words, the institutions meant to hold people accountable, landed like a thunderbolt across DHS, Congress, and federal courts. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Let's pause, because that quote may seem harmless to some. Just a rich man expressing frustration. But in the middle of an active legal battle over whether Harry received special treatment by those very institutions, it was suicidal. Why? Because in U.S. immigration law, there's a catch-all provision most people don't even know exists. It's called the Good Moral Character Clause. And guess what? It's subjective. It's broad. It's discretionary. And it gives immigration officials the power to deny or revoke a visa if they believe the individual shows contempt for U.S. law, values, or institutions. That clause has been used against artists, athletes, business moguls. And now, critics want it used against Prince Harry. Conservative lawyers pounced. Within 24 hours of Harry's speech, the Heritage Foundation filed a supplemental motion in their lawsuit, citing Harry's recent remarks as further proof that the public has a right to know whether DHS granted him a waiver despite past drug use and possible anti-American sentiment. Media headlines exploded. Prince Harry blasts U.S. institutions while under visa review. Harry calls America's accountability system broken, while fighting to stay. New attack could cost Prince Harry his U.S. status, legal experts say. Tucker Carlson dedicated an entire segment to it. "This guy's unbelievable," he barked. "He comes to America, gets rich, lectures us, admits to drug crimes, and now insults the very people deciding if he can stay?" Even liberal outlets struggled to defend him. "Tone deaf," wrote one columnist in The Atlantic. "Reckless," said another in The Guardian. And just like that, Harry's public image shifted again. No longer the vulnerable prince. No longer the traumatized soldier. Now, the arrogant foreigner who lashes out, then plays the victim. Inside DHS, the pressure grew. Sources whispered to journalists that several officials were deeply concerned about the optics of Harry's statements. One anonymous source claimed a review of high-profile visa cases, including Harry's, was being discussed internally. They stopped short of confirming any investigation. But the message was clear. Harry had poked the wrong bear. Back in Montecito, panic set in. Harry's legal team reportedly scrambled. They contacted the summit's organizers, requesting footage be contextualized. They issued quiet background statements to reporters, claiming the quote was misinterpreted, that Harry was speaking broadly about the media landscape, not the legal system. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Because public opinion doesn't wait for context, and neither do political enemies. Within 72 hours, a Republican lawmaker introduced a resolution demanding an oversight hearing on the handling of Prince Harry's visa. And in a fiery speech on the House floor, he said, "If you or I wrote a memoir admitting to drug use, then stood on a stage and called our country's institutions broken, we'd be on the next flight home. Why is Prince Harry different?" No answer came. Then came the dominoes. Public petitions began circulating, demanding Harry be deported. Right-wing commentators called for congressional subpoenas of DHS officials. Legal watchdog groups filed additional FOIA requests, not just for Harry's visa, but for communications between his team and White House officials. Online rumors swirled that political favors were being traded behind the scenes to protect him. Whether true or not didn't matter. The court of public opinion was in session. And Prince Harry was losing. Now here's where it gets really dangerous. For Harry, the U.S. immigration system can retroactively revoke a visa, even years later, if new evidence comes to light, if fraud is suspected, or if public conduct violates the standards of the visa. The government can issue a notice to appear in immigration court. It's rare, but it happens. And the Heritage Foundation's legal team knows this. In interviews, they began laying out the case. Harry's drug admissions violate the Immigration and Nationality Act. If he did not disclose them at the time of application, that's fraud. If he received a waiver, the public has a right to know. If he's now publicly attacking U.S. institutions while holding a special visa, his moral character is in question. One lawyer even said, "The American people deserve to know whether the government bent the rules for a prince who doesn't respect them." Meghan reportedly urged Harry to issue a statement of clarification, but he refused. He believed he was being misunderstood. He believed in his message. He believed he was telling the truth. But in the U.S. legal system, truth doesn't always protect you, especially when you've already put your name on a visa form that contradicts your book, and especially when that book is now being cited, page by page, in federal court. By week's end, Trump jumped back in. In a now-viral speech at a Michigan rally, he declared, "Let me tell you something. If you come to America, make millions, use drugs, then call our justice system broken, you're getting a one-way ticket out. Period." The crowd roared. Chants erupted. Send him back. No special rules. America first. It was official. Harry wasn't just part of the story anymore. He was the story. A foreign-born royal. Under visa scrutiny. Criticizing American institutions. Protected, perhaps, by privilege. And for Trump, it was a gift, a wedge issue, a populist rallying cry. And behind the scenes, heritage lawyers smiled, because Harry's latest outburst had given them more than they ever hoped for. It wasn't just about the drugs now. It was about patriotism, respect, legitimacy, and in legal terms, it was about character. But then, just as the firestorm reached its peak, another twist emerged. A whistleblower. Anonymous, unverified, unseen, but very real. A former DHS employee claiming to have seen Harry's file. And what they said could change everything. What happens when silence is no longer an option? When the whispering inside government offices gets too loud, too dangerous, too damning, and someone decides to speak. That's exactly what happened. Because just as the Heritage Foundation ramped up its legal assault, just as Trump weaponized Harry's words into political artillery, just as the media turned Prince Harry from exiled royal into potential deportee, something even more explosive surfaced. A leak. Not a rumor. Not a tweet. An actual memo. Allegedly from inside the Department of Homeland Security. And it could be the tipping point that sends this entire controversy from political theater to immigration enforcement. Because if this memo is real, and if the whistleblower behind it is telling the truth, then the entire system may have been rigged from the start. And Prince Harry? He might have been protected, not by merit, but by influence. It began quietly. An anonymous envelope. No return address. No signature. Just a single sheet of paper, typed, stamped, marked DHS internal. Delivered to two conservative media outlets. One in Washington, one in California. At first, no one wanted to touch it. Leaks happen all the time. Most are fake. Some are desperate attempts for attention. But this one, it wasn't scribbled in pen. It wasn't full of grammatical errors or wild accusations. It was methodical, clinical, cold. The headline read, USCIS Review, Special Entry Consideration, Subject H. The body contained brief notes, allegedly referencing a high-profile immigration case involving a non-citizen applicant with public drug admissions. Though no names were mentioned, key phrases stood out. Subject admitted to multiple instances of narcotics use, self-reported in commercial publication. Risk factor noted, waived by supervisory discretion, override memo issued. Recommendation, defer FOIA response due to sensitivity of profile. Then came the final line. Chilling in its simplicity. Reassessment not advised, high optic sensitivity, exec awareness level 3. What did that mean? Translation. Someone very high up was aware. Someone issued a waiver. And someone warned not to dig too deep. The memo hit conservative media like a lightning bolt. Leaked DHS doc implies Harry received quiet visa waiver. Insider claims, DHS overruled red flags in Harry's case. Was the White House aware? And just like that, speculation turned into accusation. Because if this memo is authentic, it doesn't just confirm what critics feared, it confirms it was deliberate. That DHS officials flagged concerns about Harry's visa eligibility. That someone higher up overruled the process. That political pressure or celebrity influence might have tipped the scales. And in the middle of an election cycle? That's not just a scandal. That's a time bomb. Let's rewind. Back when Spare dropped, immigration lawyers were already murmuring that Harry's admissions could trigger ineligibility. Multiple experts appeared on mainstream and cable news, all saying the same thing. If he admitted this during the application, a waiver would be required. If he didn't disclose it, it could be grounds for revocation. Either way, DHS should have documented it. And yet, the government refused to release anything. No forms, no confirmations, no denials. Just radio silence. That silence was damning enough. But now, this leak seemed to explain it. DHS wasn't stalling because it had nothing to show. It was stalling because it didn't want to show what it had. And then came the whistleblower. Not content with a single memo, the anonymous source began contacting journalists directly, using encrypted email, communicating only through intermediaries. They claimed to be a former USCIS analyst who reviewed VIP immigration files, known internally as flagged entry cases. And Harry? He was flagged. The source claimed the review was brief but contentious. That standard procedure recommended follow-up documentation, possibly even an interview. But instead of the usual protocol, a superior allegedly marked the file for discretionary override, citing PR sensitivity. In plain English, they didn't want a scandal. They didn't want headlines. They wanted it buried. Now, you might be asking, why would anyone inside DHS protect Prince Harry? Good question. Here's what the whistleblower suggests. In 2020, when Harry entered the U.S., it was peak COVID era. The world was still on fire. The Biden administration had not yet taken office. Trump was in his final months. But even then, DHS had reasons to avoid a royal PR crisis. They knew Harry and Meghan were controversial. They knew the press would explode if a denial occurred. They knew activists, celebrities, and political operatives would scream retaliation. So someone, maybe under pressure, maybe proactively, paved a smoother path. No confrontation, no rejection, just approval. Quietly, quickly, internally. Now, fast forward to 2023. Spare explodes. The confessions go public. Trump roars. Heritage sues. And the Biden DHS is left holding the bag. Because if they release the documents now, they admit complicity. If they keep hiding, they look corrupt. It's a lose-lose situation. And for Harry, it could mean everything. Because here's what the memo suggests. If Harry received a waiver, that means DHS knew about the drug use and let it slide. That's not illegal if proper procedures were followed. But if no waiver exists and the drugs weren't disclosed, that's fraud. And fraud means removal proceedings. Visa revoked. Green card denied. Future citizenship blocked. And that's not speculative. There are hundreds of cases where immigrants were deported for less. A 23-year-old Brazilian woman removed for failing to disclose a 10-year-old marijuana arrest. A Canadian businessman denied entry for admitting to recreational drug use on a podcast. Even celebrity chef Nigella Lawson was banned from boarding a U.S. flight over past drug admissions. So why is Prince Harry different? That's the question, and the memo only fuels it. Inside Washington, panic brewed. Multiple senators requested briefings. Legal advocacy groups demanded independent oversight. Cable networks reran the memo analysis every hour. And in Montecito, a chill set in. Because for the first time, it wasn't just speculation. There was paperwork, internal language, government phrasing that pointed to something Harry could no longer spin, charm, or ignore. Harry's team issued a rare statement. They denied any wrongdoing. They said, the Duke of Sussex remains in full compliance with all U.S. immigration requirements. But they did not deny that a waiver had been granted. They did not confirm whether drug use was disclosed. And they absolutely did not comment on the leaked memo. That silence said everything. The Heritage Foundation jumped on it. Their lawyers amended their case, citing the leak as cause for emergency expedited disclosure. They filed a motion to depose current and former DHS officials under oath. And the judge? She didn't throw it out. She scheduled a hearing. Suddenly, the odds had shifted. What began as a speculative lawsuit was now a full-blown legal inquisition. And Harry might be called to testify. But it gets worse. Because if a federal court orders the unsealing of his visa file, and it contradicts Spare, the fallout could be historic. Immediate revocation of his visa. Congressional hearings. A full DHS audit. And for Harry, legal action. Media disgrace. Deportation. And if Trump regains the presidency, all bets are off. Because now there's proof, allegedly, that the system was bypassed. And if there's one thing Trump's base hates more than corruption, it's corruption they were right about all along. And yet, the biggest twist of all, the whistleblower has promised more. In a final encrypted message to a reporter, they wrote, if the court delays, I'll release the rest. Names, dates, communications, everything. Which means this story, it's not peaking, it's just beginning. Because what's buried in that file, what DHS may be hiding, what Harry may be trying to forget, could be the key to everything. And what comes next could shatter not just his life in America, but his entire royal exile. What happens when a legal skirmish becomes a full-blown war? When a lawsuit meant to raise awareness transforms into the sword aimed at the heart of a prince's American dream? We're there now. Because after months of political games, whistleblower leaks, media frenzy, and Trump-led crusades, the Heritage Foundation's lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security wasn't just alive. It was accelerating, with precision, with momentum, and with public support that seemed to grow louder by the hour. And their target? Prince Harry's visa file. Every page, every checkbox, every internal note. They wanted it all. Not redacted, not summarized, unsealed, in full. For the public to see. Because according to them, and millions watching around the world, it was time to stop speculating and start uncovering the truth. Was Harry's entry to the United States legal? Or was it a carefully protected political favor, wrapped in celebrity glow and royal entitlement? Let's rewind to the start of the legal war. Heritage originally filed their FOIA request shortly after Spare was released. It was simple, on paper. They asked DHS, Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, to release Prince Harry's visa application, supporting documents, and any internal communications related to his immigration status. They cited overwhelming public interest, given that Harry had publicly admitted to illegal drug use, a factor that could disqualify him from receiving a U.S. visa. DHS stonewalled. They denied the request. They said the documents were protected under privacy laws. Heritage responded by filing a lawsuit. They argued that Harry himself had waived any reasonable expectation of privacy by voluntarily releasing his drug history in a global best-selling memoir and multiple TV interviews. And for a while, the case crawled. No hearings, no statements, no media fire. Until now, the leaked memo and the whistleblower's threat to release even more changed everything. Suddenly, the lawsuit wasn't about hypothetical transparency. It was about potential fraud, and the court felt it. At the next hearing, Heritage attorneys arrived with a renewed filing, a motion to compel expedited discovery, citing the whistleblower's